but I would prefer if you put your hand up and then bring the mic over and make your point. And these four guys on the front of the stage, it's not really a stage, on the floor here, they've got right of veto because they've got four mics that are always turned on. So we're going to... Oh yeah, also, because we're recording the session, we are not going to be able to edit out anything you say which you accidentally shouldn't have. So think before you speak in regards to, secret information. We are amongst friends, but it's also, all your friends online.
Those will be confiscated.
What's that, sorry? So how will we do that? Mm-hmm.
We'll capture a copy of the recording and put it up on the show.
That's good, man. Yeah, cool.
Let me see if we can get the logistics worked out. You guys are recording it.
Yeah. So Richard just wanted to hijack our panel and turn it into a .NET Rocks episode. So now you've got an international audience. Are we ready? So Richard, do I just...
One sec.
Okay. Holding up all these people.
Yeah, my comment better half of the way to do it. The largest guy up there.
It's going to be hard to find.
Suspense is killing me. I can't believe you just held out the room like that.
It was well done, wasn't it?
It was good. Okay, Richard, I'm going to count down. 10, 9, you coming back in the room?
I'll do it solo. We lost Carla.
Okay. Yeah, come on. I'm apologising to all the people outside. We didn't think this one would overflow, but
Who knew you were so popular?
hey, it's not me. It's all these people.
Thanks, sir. Now, Jill, you're going to sell the panel?
Come on.
Have you got a microphone? What? No, I haven't. I just took it from you. You took the only mic in the room. Wouldn't be the first time. You guys mind doing this as a .NET Rocks? Is that all right? So we're doing a .NET Rocks live. So what's going to happen then is I'm going to start the show off by saying, "Hey, New Zealand, welcome to .NET Rocks," and you need to lose it. Okay? I want you out of your chairs, throwing things at each other. Lose it, right? We need the fire marshal in here. It's a consequence. And just to let the folks that are listening on the show to know you had a good time, right? That's the goal. And after that, I think we'll just introduce the panel, and I might throw some questions at you from left field because that's my job. And if you've got a question, if you put up your hand, I'll run to you so we get the question on the show, right? It's important to get everything recorded, and we won't let them off the hook on it. You up for that?
Yep.
Yeah. You ready? Okay.
No.
I will ask you to do it again if you don't pull it up, all right? Drawing blood isn't necessary, but just below that threshold will be good. Hey, New Zealand! Welcome to .NET Rocks! Wow, my goodness, you guys are enthusiastic. And I've heard that normally Kiwis are quite restrained. So we're talking about the future of web development, and we got a panel of esteemed experts sitting here. Let's start closest to me. Introduce yourself and what you know.
Hi, I'm Chris O'Donoghue. I've got a history of development, architecture, strategy for about quite a few years now. Ran an ISP in the early 90s, And
When it wasn't cool to do so.
no, it certainly wasn't, but hey, it was fun.
Yes.
Spent a fair bit of time at a major media company, sort of in charge of their online, their innovation, and recently in charge of a small international software development team.
Awesome. Next up.
Hi, I'm Aid Krzyzewski. I work for TVNZ, soon to leave and starting a new company. So
In the web space?
yeah, in the strategy and architecture space.
Okay.
So I'm an enterprise architect. I've been involved in the creation of tvnz.co.nz and TVNZ On Demand, and now in the sort of senior strategy and architecture space.
Excellent.
My name's Andrew Tokley. I've been involved in software development for quite a while, predominantly in the Microsoft platform. I am currently working for Xero. Go Xero.
That guy really liked it.
Yeah. I think he's the only other guy who works for Xero here. So that's kind of a good position to be in this topic of future web apps. Xero's doing pretty well there, and how that might go in the future is quite interesting. So I'm a Silverlight MVP, so that's also relevant, I guess, to what might be the future.
Definitely impacting the web.
And I was terrified coming here that with the Twitter phenomena that's happening, that you get instantaneous feedback on your performance on stage. Now we have the .NET Rocks recording as well, which will go even further than
It's all right. We'll make sure we circulate your email address on the show as well.
Okay, I feel better now.
Yeah. Certainly, last but not least.
My name is Darren Wood. I'm the token front-end nerd, also Mac user. I'm hoping that you guys will just protect me from the hordes. I'm a web standards nerd. I design websites all day. I build using HTML and CSS. So yeah, web standards. Hey.
All right. Don't look at me. What did I say? Okay, I didn't say anything. All right, where shall we begin? Obviously, all of this is now simple. The future of the web is HTML5, and we can go home, right?
Yeah, right.
Andrew agrees.
Well, it's certainly not the future, but it's the way it's going to go. I mean, HTML5 used to be called web application.
Right.
And they basically took it away and rolled that into HTML. It's less marking documents up online and more creating applications, usable, functional bits of things online. And it doesn't necessarily mean a web browser. It could be, your cell phone, your telly, your fridge, if you're that fancy. But it's certainly an exciting way forward without having to bother about plugins or any of those sorts of proprietary things.
You were really nice before this. When we talked about it, you didn't mention plugins once, and now it's...
Well, the game's on, dude.
Every second word was plugin then.
Because we're still battling in the HTML5 standards. We're not so much plugins, but codecs. I mean, what video format are we going to play? And that effectively, now we're back to the plugin requirement. I'm going to have to install something to make that work.
Yeah, that is true. It's the constant battle. I think H.264 is going to win.
I hope so.
But there are, of course, the licensing issues
Yes.
that come with that. I'm probably not the best person to talk about those sort of things, but it is a concern.
Yeah, it certainly is a concern. And from a broadcaster's perspective, transcoding into multiple transcode formats is a cost you don't want to have to cover, and it takes away from the bottom line.
Right. And every time you switch formats, you have other problems as well. And there's certainly been a drive towards a completely open codec. But it doesn't seem like anybody's willing to support that.
Well, no. Open source and open formats are often quite scary because you've got a bunch of faintly pizza-smelling nerds sitting in a back room doing something magical. And a lot of times, like Firefox is happy to adopt that because they themselves are an open source sort of organization, but it's the more corporate and, the Apples, the Microsofts that are finding it difficult to come to terms with OGG, for example, which is the proposed open format for video and audio. At the end of the day, the best one is going to win. I mean, if you look at something like the GIF PNG argument, personally, I'm going to go with PNG all the way.
Right.
Not only because it's open, but because it's a far superior technology than.
Yeah, it's nice when those two things go together, but they don't always go together. We get
That's
into
right,
the Betamax VHS debate, right, where
Yeah.
Betamax was clearly superior, but Sony crippled it with its licensing requirements. There are two ways around that, and the inferior technology won. And I wonder if we're up against the same thing here. To me, the issue seems to be the threat of patent violation around those codecs. That the fact that we have H.264, which we know and understand, but the best feature of that whole thing is we know where the licensing lies with it, even if it is an expense. At least it's known.
I think you're onto a good point there, but I think it's not so much the technology that's sitting behind it. It's possibly who becomes the fastest content aggregator. Who's got the most content? Who's got the greatest volume of content that's most interesting to the audience?
So you're saying YouTube wins?
Well,
YouTube
maybe not, but then
yeah.
there's commercial content, there's the free content, but the commercial content's the stuff that people really, the Lost, the Desperate Housewives, the stuff that people kind of want to watch for free and they're getting for free at the moment. If you aggregate that on the web, if you're the big volume house that can get that stuff out there faster than anybody else, and you propose a particular standard, then you might be the winner. That particular standard becomes the winner.
That's another element of it. I think we've gone down a particular area here, which certainly we're trying to poke holes in HTML5, but I think it's pretty hard to resist its long-term potential. But isn't there room for Silverlight and, heaven forbid, Flash in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I thought what a good question to ask, and what we asked ourselves when we got together before this was, what is a web application? So we posed the question of the future of web applications, and it's actually quite hard to define now. It used to be, not that long ago, that a web application was simply an application delivered through the browser, and then obviously HTML was heads and shoulders above everyone else. Standards-based approach meant you had the widest possible reach. It was all goodness, but I guess if we're thinking about the future of web applications, then it becomes, well, I think it becomes more than the browser. It becomes, what's driving the applications on your mobile devices. You probably all got lots of native apps defined on there. And so there's more of an acceptance of non-browser or non-HTML based applications driving your access to the data and services of the web. And so I like to think of web applications perhaps in a kind of almost an old-fashioned way, almost like a smart client, thin client mentality, where it's a bit bigger than just this, is HTML cool, or is Silverlight cool, or is Flash not cool. I think they solve different problems.
Well, let me throw this at you a different way then, because I think you're hinting along these same lines, which is, does the web application even exist anymore? The same way that, is there any application today that doesn't use networking in some respect? If it's all on the network, the web's not a big jump. It's not like there's two different protocols or anything there. Isn't every application now effectively a web application in that definition? Other than the only question mark there is maybe browser or not, but we're delivering, I look at ClickOnce, delivering perfectly normal client apps, but installed over the web. Is there anything that's really not a web application?
It's a massive grey area, and so in the Silverlight space in WPF, it's even more interesting because it's very obvious that greying of the space.
Right.
You go from a plugin in a browser, and then there's a gradation of out of browser, then it becomes a pure WPF app, and so this idea of, and then you got Windows Phone 7 app, you're all using similar technologies, and that sort of continuum of stuff. I dream of a future of web apps where I go file a new web app. And I'm coding away, and then I go, it's sometime down the track I go, okay, I'm going to target that to the Windows Phone, or I'm going to target that to my desktop, and it's going to, just like when you target a framework now, and you're building a desktop app or a ASP.NET site, and you choose the targeted framework, and all of a sudden you target the .NET 4, and you're allowed now to reference .NET 4 assemblies. You can do some goodness there. Now that would be kind of cool I'm targeting the desktop, and now I only have access to those assemblies that will run on the desktop. Similarly, if I'm targeting the phone, it'd be nice to only have those that can target that device.
It's almost like you're describing HTML5 there for a second.
If it weren't for the fact that the future devices that are going to run these applications, it's going to be there. But there's devices that we're using. You think of television, you think of phone. All those devices require the application, require applications that run on them to also talk to those things, to read the temperature, to know where you are, to do stuff. And some of those things are coming into HTML, and that's really exciting. But I wonder it's going to be interesting. HTML6 and 7, are they going to really allow that sort of interaction with the device that they're running on? That which they can't, it's kind of sandbox now. That's kind of not allowed at the moment, but becoming allowed.
Well, maybe this is the creative, non-technical side of me coming through, but for me, HTML is not even a programming language. It's markup.
Well, we've been saying that for years.
Yeah, exactly.
But for an entirely different reason. But
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's an important point to make is, you can go further down and learn how to program and do these things correctly. I say correctly, but as like a proper application. But HTML, CSS, really easy to achieve these things without getting too involved, specifically as creatives. It's the perfect solution. However, there's the flip side to that. There's the, the Dreamweaver, the front page that are going to mangle code and produce some horrific things. So it is a fine line, and I think the kids today are finding these.
Sorry, I'm interested. I'm really interested. Really struggling here. Sorry.
And I think it's just becoming more accessible and easier to produce these rich applications without having to rely on a hardcore programming background.
Sure, that's just the front end, though, isn't it?
It is the front end, and that's what the consumers use.
Exactly, and there's so much more that's sitting behind there.
Yeah.
And the cloud obviously provides a different perspective that hasn't been there so much in the past, or isn't so accessible as it is in the past. And by cloud, I mean consumable services, not just SaaS applications.
Yep.
Well, this sort of begs the question, this is a different side of this whole conversation around future web apps, which is the same way that HTML5 seems to be blowing up the story of what the client's going to be like. Is cloud blowing up the life of the ISP? Why are we going to need ISPs if everything's living in one of 4 major cloud providers?
Well, I doubt if it's going to be one of 4 because there'll be niche providers and things like that. But ISPs are going to go back to access, like they,
They're going to go back to
access.
access?
Like providing, like access to the network.
Right. I would think that maybe they pick up a piece of the cloud. They'd run their own chunks.
They'll try, but certainly for big commodity clouds, I think they will in niche services. But who can compete with the Amazons and the Microsofts of this world?
Right. So in the same way that most ISPs don't own the IP addresses per se, they're licensing them from ICANN and so forth, and they generally don't own their own wire. They'll eventually not own their own servers.
Yeah.
So why do they exist?
Because consumers can't get online by themselves. They need help.
So we're counting on the incompetence of Microsoft's provisioning to keep them in business.
Not just Microsoft, Apple's,
there's lots of... Amazon will make it hard too.
All programmers are useless.
We better survey the room here while we're going to... How many people consider themselves a web developer in this room right now? So that's about maybe a third. How many would consider themselves infrastructure experts that run the web infrastructure? Very, very few. So the rest of you just happy to be here? Are there other roles? Like we were still missing about 2/3 of the room. Just regular designers. Yeah, web designers. How many designers? Most guys are here.
Who's just a developer? Who's a developer rather than a web developer?
Just a regular developer.
Yeah.
Primarily put themselves in developer artists. We still haven't gotten half the room. How many people's arms can't be lifted above their heads? There we go. Okay. So now we're seeing that they were loud for the Welcome to Don and Rocks, but they're a little more shy when you want to categorize them.
Yeah, well, who likes being put in a box?
There you go. I don't want to be any particular species.
That's right. But, I don't know. I don't really care about, the future landscape of access provision and who's going to... Well, I do, but it's a different conversation than web apps. I think some of the major issues that, like we were talking about earlier, what is a web app, is, we've talked a lot about, presentation layer, HTML5, is it a rich application on the desktop? But then where does the logic sit? Where does the data sit? Adrian before talked about consumption of services out of the cloud, or it might be consumption of a specialist service from another application, or, basically, that plethora, that expansion of to many devices, many services. This is what I consider the future of web apps, that where we'll have presentation layers that may or may not be in a browser, maybe a rich device-specific application, and logic that may sit somewhere between the web and the device.
But the interesting thing is, though, that we've been, for a few years now, we've been really big on thin clients. It's the beauty of web design, it's really thin, but it's becoming thicker and thicker. as we introduce Ajax and JavaScript and more functionality within the HTML language itself.
But even
And
the,
Silverlight is
even the
even
modern
better.
smartphone blows that up. There's a lot of horsepower in a smartphone.
And then native apps, they're not, you might use your browser if you have to, but if you've got a Twitter client, you're not going to browse to twitter.com. You're going to crank open whatever you're using on your phone. It's like we talked a little about whether we should talk about the history of stuff, because it's like, things are repeating themselves, and we're now getting richer clients than we ever have. Even though the SOA cloud architecture is there, we're still putting processing on these clients and on different devices, and it raises all sorts of interesting questions about, as someone who builds these applications, how do you spread your time across those multiple devices you have to target without having to build a unique app for every single flavor of phone and toaster and fridge and television?
Well, one of the pushes of the SOA architecture was that we were going to end up supporting a lot of clients, and we wanted to lighten the load on those client implementations.
That's right.
Now, here's an interesting point. You brought this up already, that smartphone apps generally are not in browser because we don't have so much horsepower that we can afford that inefficiency. But are they web apps?
I guess when I said, and I suggested this topic because I was thinking about the apps that we build today.
Right.
And a lot of the apps we build today are what I call web apps. They're in the perhaps the more traditional sense of HTML-based sites. But I think the evolution of web apps is perhaps more accurate. Maybe we're evolving to non-web apps, but they're using some of those.
How about web-dependent app?
Maybe. Yeah.
That's a good term.
But like you mentioned earlier, which apps aren't?
What apps aren't web-dependent? In some respect. And it seems like all these smartphone apps are very web dependent because they can't afford a lot of processing horsepower in their device. They're spending most of that for the UI, and then they're shoving up typically to the cloud to do their computation on the back end.
Now, in theory, that's a great idea, but specifically in New Zealand, we have mobile broadband issues.
No!
Yeah. In fact, not even mobile.
No!
So, I think that becomes an interesting point, and I keep on saying HTML5, but HTML5 gives you the opportunity to have an offline cache. And I think perhaps not distant future, but certainly in the next year or so, this will have to become something that we use more and more and consider when building apps. It's like when to poll the server. Is the server even there?
Right. I mean, that whole ability to survive in a disconnected state, right?
Yeah.
Who was it? Was it Esther Dyson said it was easier to put Wi-Fi everywhere than it was to build a good disconnected client? It's hard to actually have an app that tolerates losing its connectivity.
Yeah.
But if that's the future, if we're going to build apps that have to offline themselves using web technology like HTML and offline storage, then the role of JavaScript to coordinate that offline storage when it goes detecting network availability and stuff. Currently, the tooling around doing that is challenging to say the least. It's not such an easy for a developer to debug those things. There's challenges to deploy those things can sometimes be challenging. Versioning across browsers is obviously a challenge. So,
I think maybe the future of the web application developer should think about focusing more on their JavaScript skills. I've come across some fully grown, well-formed developers who cry with fear when they look at JavaScript.
For cause!
Well, it is a scary
Case sensitivity is a horrible prank!
But I mean, JavaScript, like you said, is the way to solve those issues, and it's perhaps up to us to, increase our knowledge and skills when it comes to JavaScript, because it isn't that scary. I mean, wow.
I think
the dude who wrote jQuery
jQuery's made it
surely
remarkably more palatable.
Yeah.
But isn't the alternative that to go down the Silverlight path? I get my cross-platform, and I get to speak C# and live in a happily JavaScript-free world.
Yeah, but why?
oh yeah, can we get a clap? Awesome, nice and.
And I get to go on the phone, and I get to go on the desktop, and I get to go on.
Well,
I could go on.
As a web standards nerd, I'm going to have to fight you on that one. Because the guys above will fight me. Tim Berners-Lee will come down like a ton of bricks on me if I say anything else.
But these are all very user-facing, sort of like the veneer perspective of the internet, and there's a layer behind there that's
Canadian born in New Zealand, okay?
very true.
Yeah.
Well, to cut to the chase, I mean, your CTOs are looking to reduce complexity. They're looking to reduce the cost of deploying the big iron infrastructure they have to build out. They want to know that the solution they're going to build is going to work. They want to know that it's going to be scalable and not complex.
Right, and of course this leans beautifully into the cloud space of this thing. Is that, and I believe it's a perception, not a reality, that offload that responsibility entirely on your cloud provider. So you'll have to send angry emails as necessary when they don't deliver for you.
Yeah, but it's not so simple as that, is it? Because you've got these existing application infrastructure that needs to be integrated, it needs to be abstracted through something, and it needs to thread its way in and out of a smorgasbord of services sitting out in the cloud. And something needs to orchestrate that, and something needs to manage that, and whether that be in the cloud itself, or whether that be partially in the infrastructure you have already built, or partially in the cloud. Who knows? But my guess would be more and more of that SOA world is going to now stretch into the cloud space.
And you're not talking about UDDI, are you?
No, I'm not particularly talking about that. But that is an interesting area. And standardizations, for example, is the real gotcha, perhaps, of adoption of cloud services. Things have to, and if you're going to consume a cloud service, and it's coming from one provider, and another cloud service is going to be from another provider, you kind of want to talk the same API. You kind of want to talk the same standards. Otherwise, you can't, on the fly, switch over to another provider.
Well, and I debate, we saw this in the original web services model in WS Star standards, where it turns out that people just don't do that. That you don't switch providers casually, that it's a very cautious thing. Maybe it's only in a disaster recovery scenario. But generally speaking, people pick their services, they sign up for them very specifically, and they learn to deal with the API differences. And the WS Star standards just terrified them. They got buried by them.
However, we're talking about future, right? So the
future is all going to work.
Yeah, of course it is. But the future could be, if you have a vision of the future, for developers especially, this would be a great place to play. Being able to offer your business unit not a constrained service, but a completely open-ended service on a commodity basis. And that's a great dream. However, it may not work.
But I think there's two main drivers here. Well, Adrian sort of seems to be talking about, large organisations have these drivers where they want to reduce complexity, but also they've got business units who want to have innovation within that. And so those abstraction layers seem really obvious ways to achieve those dual goals. But then again, there's the consumer space, which is where it's got different drivers, and a lot of it is around UI. Like if it's got a nail polish in its skirt, it looks good.
Are you calling it lipstick on a pig?
Hang on, we've had a slap in the face.
That's fine.
But we've got these parallel drivers, in the web app. In the corporate space, it's less important how it looks. Functionality is important. Usability is important, but look isn't that important.
And costs are important.
Cost is the big driver.
Well, yeah, and that gets back into...
is the guy who has the last say.
Yeah, the maintainability of an app ultimately comes in there. Boy, we were taking a great sales pitch for Silverlight here.
Well, HTML is free.
Yes, and worth every penny you paid for it. And I don't know if this is a fear that I have, being an old guy in the HTML space. I remember how fragmented HTML4 was when it first came along, that every browser implemented it differently, and that there was almost a race as to who could polish that feature in a different way. And I'm deathly afraid that HTML5 is going to go down the same path.
Well, HTML5 has taken everything that we've done in the past and rolled it into the standard.
So it's a design by committee.
Well, no, that's the interesting thing.
So it's COBOL.
And this has divided a lot of HTML nerds, because what it's doing is it's loosening up the entire thing, because it's paving the cow paths, essentially. That's the fundamental design principle of HTML5. People have been building crap HTML since the dawn of time. So let's just roll that into the standard.
Make you all happy there.
I drove to Tauranga this weekend, and I think you guys do roads that way too.
Pretty much.
Oh, did I say that out loud? That's a shame.
But that whole thing of standards is really interesting, because when you get a Silverlight bigot on stage, and they and I'm not, I'm open-minded, they'll say, the problem with with HTML is that you've got to wait until, what is it, 2011 or
22, actually.
I think it's 20, isn't it? Didn't they say it was to be 10 years before it was fully ratified? It'd be like 2022?
But I think the interesting thing that's evolving now, which is in HTML's favour and in the browser vendors' favour, is that there's this kind of social conscience going on that we're seeing in some of the social networking sites now where people participate in this no rules environment and your peers kind of enforce this behaviour and adherence to the way things should be done. And so you're seeing vendors in general working as quick as they can because they don't want to be the last one there to adopt the standards that aren't standards yet. And it begs the question, do we need a standards body to say, yes, we're now ready, 5 is ready? Or should it be that the browser, that there's good sort of development practices are adopted that Darren talked about? Is it Darren? Darren. Sorry. That Darren talked about, where sort of being able to write your code in such a way that it degrades nicely if it comes across a tag it hasn't seen before, if a browser doesn't recognise it and stuff. So I think that's bodes well for the future of HTML and not being so standards bound, perhaps.
But by that same token, if a standard doesn't actually set useful guidelines for work, it ends up going in multiple directions. Witness SQL, where there is no, effectively there is no real, everybody complies with standard and nobody actually uses it.
Well, the exact same thing happened with XHTML. XML came on board. Everyone got extremely excited. They were like, okay, we're going to forget about HTML and make it into XHTML. And that tanked. Right. XHTML 2.0 came on, and it was completely not backward compatible, and game over. And HTML5 was like, wait, let's just go back, look at what people are doing, and use that. And another important point for HTML5 is that this standard is telling browser vendors what to do when it fails as well, which has always been inferred by the browser vendors, but there's been no standards around that. And I think that's an important point as well. And it helps, the browser vendors of the world to produce something that is going to essentially make our lives as developers and designers much easier.
Does anybody here believe we're going to get away from needing to say if IE9 then, if Chrome then? I just don't think we're going to get away from that.
I'm optimistic.
Good.
Deluded,
somebody
but
is,
optimistic.
yes. Well, I feel like HTML5 is as shiny as it will ever be because it's close but not shipping.
Yep.
Right? And so this is as good as it's going to feel. Next comes reality.
Well, I mean, that's the W3C for everything that they've done, which is great. It take forever.
Oh, yes.
Like CSS 2.1, which is we all use that every day. That arrived like only a few years ago that they finalized that. So 2022 for HTML5, yes, that is in an awful lot of time away, but browsers are supporting that already. IE has been supporting a bunch of stuff since version 7. So why not use it? It's there, and we don't necessarily have to listen to the standards body to say, okay, it's 2022, let's roll.
Because it becomes a standard when every browser on the market supports the features, a common set of features.
And we finally hit a point where the IE6 utilization got low enough we could finally say friends don't let friends run IE6 anymore. And we're building websites that go, you're running IE6, you need to get over it.
Yeah.
But what's that number? And I wonder the same thing at the adoption of HTML5 browsers. Like how many, maybe 2022 isn't a stretch. It's going to take a few years for people to move to those browsers.
Yeah, I would imagine so. And perhaps that's why it's so far ahead. But having said that, you can manipulate IE6 to make it kind of sort of play.
I like abandoning it. It's so much better.
But the problem isn't the browser uptake is faster than website renewal. There's so many websites out there which still only play nice on IE6.
Yes. Well, that's a whole other issue. Or there's still HTTP 1.0.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Clearly not the future.
Question at the back here. I'll come. Let's meet halfway. Okay, I came a lot further than you. You're slow. Hi, what's your name?
My name is Alan Mason.
And your question, sir?
Isn't HTML5 and even Silverlight really catching up to what Flash has been doing for years already?
That's fair. We have not given Flash enough love. right?
both.
I mean, it's got a huge level of adoption across browsers for an add-in. You know, it's remarkable. And fine consumer of CPU cycles too.
Yeah, it keeps my phone warm.
Yes. I just watched a video where one of the new Android phones had Flash 10 on it, and he was actually in real time able to watch the battery go down.
That's an interesting question, and it goes back to something I said earlier about paving cowpaths. And sure, HTML5 may be catching up to Flash.
I think that's a stretch.
Yeah, well, and you know, you have to remember that HTML5 is just HTML. I mean,
Yes.
it doesn't have ActionScript on the back end, or you know, C# or whatever. So yes, it is catching up. Will it replace it? I'm not totally convinced, but I certainly think it's going to take some of the limelight away.
But
things like video and audio.
Yeah, but a common perception, not here because you're all way too intelligent for that, but a common perception out there is that, you know, Flash and Silverlight play video, and now HTML5 lets you play video, so they're Flash Silverlight killers, you know, and so Silverlight and Flash are both way more than just play videos, you know, they're a whole platform to do whatever you like with. So often these debates, and there was even an awful article about comparing JavaScript with Silverlight, with this guy who had no idea, wrote this awful article, was slammed, and so there's a lot of people who are making these comparisons where it's not really necessary. You know, they're not competing with one another. They're alternative technologies, and the overlap is probably less than you think.
I beg to differ a little, even though I totally agree that Silverlight and Flash are more a development framework. You know, like what are the impressions? You know, like what are the page impressions of Flash, you know, apps? It's YouTube, it's, you know, Vimeo, it's
Facebook.
it's
Holy
Facebook.
cow. There's a whole culture of Flash apps in there.
Oh, well, yeah, sorry, I don't do Farmville.
All right. All you need to do is have a couple of teenage daughters in your life. You get to know about Flash running in Facebook.
But we often tend to ask these questions from technology point of view. So the adoption of Flash wasn't because a bunch of geeks in the room thought it was a cool technology and thought, let's put this out on the web and run it inside the web. It was because, you know, users wanted to play video, they wanted to see video in their websites, and it was very much driven by users. And so it's probably something we haven't talked about, but an interesting distinction between the way Apple run their business and the apps that they promote is very much a user-driven focus. So they look at what the user wants, they're very good at design, they're very good at the way the thing feels. Microsoft recently are taking quite a different approach where they're targeting developers with their new platforms. They're targeting the development community to fall in love with Silverlight, to have a relationship with XAML, to do stuff, to build apps for the Windows Phone, for the browser. And so, and they're hoping that will then in turn create apps that the users want to buy. And so it depends whether you're talking to a technology person or not as to whether they think Flash or Silverlight or whatever is a good idea. People, you know, you ask my mum, well, actually, you know, you wouldn't ask my mum because she doesn't know what a browser is, but you'd ask someone who you know, uses the web, you know, generally.
But I think regular consumers aren't aware one way or the other. They just want it to work.
They don't know that Flash consumes memory, you know.
Yeah, but we're at a developer conference, and these guys are going to be developing these things, right?
Sure.
So, and they're going to have their bosses who are going to say, "Are you going to is this going to be a cost-effective thing to do? Is this is what you're developing going to be reusable? Is it going to be redeployable? Is it going to work on many platforms?"
But your boss is more like my mum, and he. And I don't know your boss. Very true. But then your boss is very much focused on the experience, the end result, the profitability, the marketability of the thing that you come up with. Yeah. And whereas the grunt on the ground is going, oh, I love this technology, it shines, it buzzes. The people in this room are often convinced by the technology before they are of the actual use of it. Yeah. And so depending on which pull is stronger, depending on whether the technology drive to create really cool apps that people want is stronger than people saying, I really want this thing now and I want it to run in 3D on my TV and to be able to look at YouTube at the same time, those are the things that are perhaps going to answer some of the questions that we're posing now in terms of what the future will be.
But the strength of Flash is 10 versions. I mean, it's version 10. That is a mature technology. adoption that can't be touched. It's everywhere. It's only now that we've got this huge flap around Apple choosing not to allow Flash on their devices that we're finally dealing with situations where people have devices that won't run Flash.
And then it
until it's
becomes
been everywhere.
even more a user choice. If I want to have an iPad,
Am I going to give up Flash?
But I've got to give up Flash.
Yeah, so we've actually dragged that to the forefront of the user. I think the other struggle of Flash ultimately is I think its development tools aren't as sturdy as some, but they do work and they've been around a long time.
Which again, my mum doesn't care that
Nope.
I can build a XAML app.
But this audience does.
But this audience does. But this audience is maybe not determining the future of web apps.
Because they have to live in it.
Yeah.
So by that token, if we just look at the pure numbers, Flash makes a logical choice. It goes everywhere. Unless they have a requirement to go on an iPad, up until now, Flash was the safest choice. It was everywhere.
If you could find a Flash developer.
Yeah. Well, it was fun. Most of the Flash developers I've met don't have time for an interview because they're too busy making money. Right? They're busy guys. It's a very popular space to be in. And interesting to have Silverlight start to work into that space and bring regular C# developers able to do that sort of thing because the Flash development is an interesting challenge. I don't know if we addressed your question, sir, per se. I wanted to give Flash a little love because it's earned it. But it's earned its hate, too. Works both ways. But, if nobody used the product, then nobody would be upset with it.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, guys, we've got about 10 minutes left. Where haven't we gone? Did a little cloud time. We've definitely made fun of HTML5.
Security very much. And
What do we have to talk
we
about?
haven't talked about security very much.
Well, security is just HTTPS,
Yeah.
right?
That's crypto.
Oh, okay. But most folks, that's their reaction to security is we'll just put SSL on it and everything will be fine.
Right. So you don't care about your identity management. You don't care about your privacy settings. You don't care about buffer overflow, SQL injection. I guarantee every person who's written some, an user input here with SQL at the back is vulnerable. SQL injection.
Why don't we hammer on the identity path? Should we talk a little OpenID? Do you think this is the one?
Simple SAML or something.
Well, we're seeing this movement now with the Facebook, Google, Twitter conjunction saying your ID there can be used on these other sites. So is this the beginning of single sign-on that will actually work?
Federated sign-on, right?
Federated sign-on, essentially.
Well, I think federation, I'm not saying that any one thing is the answer per se, but a federated model is the way to go. It seems obvious that you're not going to trust one, pyramid of control.
Sure you are. It's Google.
Yeah. I'm sorry, in the corporate space, you're certainly not.
Well,
But you
Microsoft
may
tried it.
federate with your customers. Yeah, Microsoft tried it with their Hotmail.
Yeah,
ID.
remember Passport?
Yeah. Well, it's still going. Windows Live is called now, isn't
Yeah,
it?
but you can't create new Passport accounts, but Expedia will use your live account. But
Yeah.
that's about it.
But you're right though. That if you look at the future of web apps again, the change that's happening is that we do have multiple accounts with multiple different companies all over the place running on some native, some not, so, all over the place. And so, you either got a really great memory for passwords, or you do what probably most people do and just have one password and just use it everywhere, or you use it.
I have lots of passwords. They're on sticky notes all the way around my monitor.
But solving that problem, if the future of web apps can solve that problem well, in a way that actually is not too hard to implement, like the current solutions, then
Yeah, it's actually a barrier to adoption of a lot of things. I mean, it's a barrier to adoption of the integration of certain applications, especially when they're client-facing.
Yeah, well, absolutely. The idea that who's seen that OSCON demonstration or keynote by Dick Hart, where he talked about there's a bunch of stuff like what's making me crazy is entering my address again. And entering, the same criteria over and over again. It's like calling the telephone company. I have to give them my phone number 4 times every time they hand me off. I feel the same way about websites. And I still haven't seen a great answer to that we just haven't adopted yet. Sorry? You're going to have to say that. Webfinger. Okay. So that's the Kiwi version of it. And I just said, I guess the American version, Webfinger. Okay. And so Webfinger is a technology for sort of keeping your
identity and kind of federation and stuff.
And then I implement that on my website? Gentlemen, any idea? Never used Webfinger?
Never used it.
Well, you missed out, obviously.
But obviously, but again, it's saying the federated ID is the way to go. I think standards of interoperability between these things is an important thing we have to do. Why can't I just have my company's IDP that I log into and I use that for everyone? Because it can, or maybe not your company's for your Facebook account because it's got your dodgy pictures from party on Friday night. Or last night for you guys, sorry.
And is Webfinger, I presume that Webfinger is an application.
Thanks, Nigel.
You let those Webfinger guys know they have a little more work to do.
They got us.
If one use dynamic CRM on another browser rather than IE, everyone's got work to do.
Yeah, everybody's got work to do.
Yeah,
No two ways about it.
Yeah.
But what concerns me is, in this conversation so far looking at the future, we've been looking at a choice of technologies that are coming along and saying, this one's got its strengths, that one's got its strengths. But the federated sign-on, the identity information, we still don't feel like we've got the technologies we really like. It's not like if everyone would just choose OpenID, we'd be fine.
Yeah.
We're not there yet. I haven't seen a technology to make me go crazy. That's the one. Maybe that's why we haven't adopted it.
But it's only been really the last few years that we've decided on federated sign-on. Everyone seems to think that federation is the way to go. And
we're at the sharing passwords phase of the conversation now.
There's a long way to go on these. But I think, bring back to what I think the future of web apps is where is the data, where is the logic? Things like, the data definitely sits in the cloud as services out there in some, SOA type service architecture. Identity is one of those key services, and we haven't got it sussed yet.
No, we haven't got it.
We're sort of getting there, but it's not, again, nothing's making me excited. Though, again, excited about authentication.
Well, I think we're also talking about, pretty much it's the folks in this room that care about identity that way. I think the regular consumer hasn't thought to care.
No, but they hate having 20 sign-ons.
Yes.
And they hate having to enter their address 30 times.
But then when they see that I can do all my sign-ons through Google, they get chills, and perhaps not unwisely.
Yeah, exactly.
But as soon as you get around the fact that you need to have a password, that's the fundamental problem, isn't it? You don't. It's a kind of a flawed metaphor for identifying who you are, because it's, someone could find it out, someone could guess it. If more, fingerprint readers or retina scans, or if that was somehow made mainstream and usable, then we would never have this. It'd be a non-issue unless someone cut your finger off or pulled your eye out.
And why are you encouraging them to do that?
Not only that, but what about the privacy information of absolute identity of yours stored by some corporate or government information out there? Not just, your signature or a password you've chosen, but it's your DNA, it's your retina, it's your fingerprints. Biometrics, it's only, 60 odd years ago that it was a certain country in Europe that sort of used all the huge information it had gathered over the previous 8 years to then go stick people in death camps,
there's a happy turn of conversation.
Do you trust your government? So I know we all live in reasonably liberal democracies and it's pretty safe today, but if you look back, it doesn't take many decades for a government to go bad if you look back in history. Huh?
When we got our advances and America started to do tariffs against us.
Yeah, it's a little bit different, but yeah.
Well, no, the same thing here. We do it again, and America says, well, no more cloud for New Zealand.
That's right.
That's a very good point.
Turn off the cloud.
You've got to make a very strong decision when you choose a cloud provider. You are making a decision that could be the life of your corporate, the strength of the execution of your corporate services. And if that cloud service isn't going to execute fast and efficiently, and you could go down. And what you do about that? And they'll say, well, they'll just shift that service to another closer provider, but what's the proof?
Yeah, it seems to me, especially considering the bandwidth constraints around New Zealand, that there needs to be cloud providers in country. And I think that's generally an issue for a lot of data anyway. There's plenty of law in the EU side of things that says our citizens' data must live in the country if it's privacy-related data, and I don't think that's going to be going away anytime soon. We are trying to address these sense of privacy, and I'm interested to see generally the Kiwi attitude toward government. That seems very friendly. You were concerned about. It seems to make sense that we would have a central authority for identity.
Oh, no.
which is the question of who that authority may be. We want single sign-on, or we want federated
But federated can be a decentralised federation. You can decide your trust boundaries between your, IDP and whatever you're federating with.
I just wonder if that's beyond the level of the average consumer. That
I'm not
just
saying that the
thinking those
consumer
terms.
has to, but they have an organisation that they vest trust in.
Because VeriSign will keep you safe. But I mean, again, we end
all
up
seeing the web apps.
we get back to the situation of we want to appoint a leader in this space, and then we won't trust them, right? Whether that be Google or a government or Microsoft or VeriSign, it's the same problem each time, right? We don't actually have a central
But
store.
some people will trust Microsoft and some people will trust Google. If we have a good federation system between them, then let them trust that, or trust their local tennis club.
The local tennis club. Guys, let's move on to a funner topic as we wrap up. What is the future of online gaming around this? This is a different class of web app, and certainly one with some money in it.
Yeah. More sad WoW addicts. Like those sort of massively multiplayer.
Massive multiplayer. The WinPhone 7's bringing entry space into there, where they're talking about the integration with Xbox. And
I find that so hard to get excited about. I've got a 19-year-old boy who spends a lot of time.
Right. Well, it looks like they're building more and more ingredients to spend more time.
Yeah.
So
I'm kind of, maybe I don't want to take over the comparing, but I'm really interested. When I thought of this, about this topic, what's the future of web apps, I was keen to know when I think of the future, the keynote, they had like space age, was it the keynote? They had this video and she was lounging on a couch and doing stuff with something and her TV was changing. There was all these sort of avatar-like technologies that she was using. And, sitting in front of Firefox on a browser with some text boxes and text on it cannot be the future of web apps. And I'd like to think, that maybe other people have got a vision for what they think things are going to be like in a few years' time. And if that vision can't be solved by the technology we have here, then that shows us perhaps where the technology now has to evolve to realise those visions of what the thought leaders in the industry are thinking about, what they want to do in the future to reach people.
Oh, was everybody in the keynote? Saw this sort of seamless integration approach to what's on my phone ends up on my Surface, because we all want a $15,000 coffee table. Goes over to my TV, shows up on my PC. We really haven't talked about this part. That was very cool. I like that a lot.
I think you were talking about the video that I showed in my session.
That was even more.
Sorry, Nigel.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, I mean, I just want to. It's really easy when you have these discussions to think about the technology that we know about, because but that's now, and okay, we can think how it might evolve to tomorrow, but what is good? We haven't talked about this sort of ubiquitous web, OS, where there is no OS, it's just a container for these applications, and whether that's a browser or not, that's an interesting.
Well, I saw the
topic.
tweet go by that says in 2022, I hope I'm not using a browser.
Yeah.
I think in 2022, don't we go to the Matrix head plug-in thing? And I'm going to watch HTML5 errors directly into my eyes.
I hope I'm
Hell yes.
or got a very long cord.
The idea of having a TV set in your living room that's your computer, that is your presentation for your social family, as space and how to watch that.
But that's so today. How many people here have got like a
Focusing on a device is fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about is ubiquity and immersion.
Sorry?
Focusing on a device is fundamentally wrong. What we're talking about is ubiquity and total immersion, and that happens once the Internet of Things meets connectivity 24/7 and situational devices, and thinking in paradigms of a screen or a browser or even a technology is fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, I was kind of going to move on to something else. I was just setting a scene for the future. But one of the aspects of that vision is where you separate the personal device versus the social space inside the family home. And the place where you sit around and you consume media and you watch stuff that's part of your family time together, versus everybody sitting in their rooms with their own personal devices or their own way of consuming their media. And that's a big paradigm shift.
Last 5 minutes, guys. Let's give some final comments for each one, starting this center.
Well, what are the future of web apps? I believe it's, it's just going to get more and more diverse. We're going to have, I don't think there is a nice ubiquity model. There's not an Internet of Things meeting, the whole, there's not that beautiful sci-fi space. It is going to be and. We're going to have parallel, people living in Africa with, dial-up modems. They're going to have people who use the internet to, do a bit of shopping and browse, their sites with right through, to some people with TV enabled. It's going to be everything, unfortunately. It's the older technology.
I got to stop you on the Africa thing. Spend some time in Kenya, where if I want to buy something, if I want to pay you back the $5 you lent me, I pay you on the phone. Right, everything's phone driven. I go do my shopping off my phone. Right, like there's an upside to not having the old infrastructure around. They get to build the new infrastructure first. Right, cell phones drive that country. They've got a very different perception of the internet than we've got, and it's not necessarily a bad one.
No, I agree. But I'm saying it's different. I'm saying it's and.
Right.
It's not. There's not some ubiquitous.
Or you could say if then. That's what we're really going to, as developers.
From a developer point of view, you're just going to have a whole lot more nested ifs.
So the future of web apps is more pain. You heard it here first.
Pain, unfortunately, because people are going to come up with more and more cool ideas, and the old ones aren't going to go away.
All right. Next up.
Hey, for you developers, I think the world's going to be full of services. I think you're going to be writing less and less code in-house, and you're going to be using a lot more mashup stuff sitting in the web. It's going to make life extremely complicated, and making decisions and choices around that starts becoming a business decision rather than a developer decision.
Excellent.
So from my perspective, the future of the web is not as bad as you sound. I think it's very exciting for developers, and I think that the challenges are going to be that it's going to be more and more demands for your applications that you'll build to target more and more devices, and that's going to become an economic challenge for your boss, because he's going to have to decide how much to invest in each of those independent front-end applications that are going to talk with the cloud or whatever it might be. So your boss is going to have to make some decisions about the technology sets that he uses. I think future HTML is not going to cut it in its current form to fill those needs where you need to communicate with your device, where you need to interact with your toaster. Those scenarios, HTML hasn't got there yet, and I'm really interested to know whether HTML will evolve to become to jump out of its sandbox more, because if it doesn't, then other things will need to.
I'll let HTML5 go last.
Thanks. Well, I agree with almost everything that was mentioned there, but I think the fundamental problem is, or will be, the lack of standardization, and specifically when you come to interfacing with these cloud environments. What is your API going to look like? Are you using REST? Are you using SOAP? And in that, how easy will it be to swap in between? So, as a standards nerd, I'd have to say that focusing on standards will make the web a better place, not only from a front-end point of view, but across the board.
As long as that standard's Silverlight, yeah.
Frankly, I don't really mind what that standard is, as long as it's open, accessible, and relatively easy to understand and use.
That's a great closing line. Hope this was good for you. Thanks for coming on .NET Rocks. Thanks very much.